Welcome to what I hope to become a new series on my channel, talking about mutant characters who you might have never heard of. I realize that despite the fact I have a X-Men playlist and I'm a huge X-Men fanboy, I've never really talked about the X-Men on my channel that much. I think this series idea could give me a chance to talk not only about the X-Men, but characters that are often overlooked. Today's mutant is Tommy Morrison, or just Tommy. Her last name was never actually mentioned anywhere I could find, but for some reason some places label her online as Tommy Morrison. I couldn't find a source for that, but it could maybe be in a handbook or something. But at the same time, I'm not entirely sure if it actually is her name or not, since some places label her as Tommy Morrison, but other places just label her as Tommy. Now, what's interesting about Tommy to me is that her first appearance is also her death, but if you read comics, you know that means nothing. This being Uncanny X-Men issue 210 from 1986, the start of a pivotal arc that would have ripples for years to come. The Mutant Massacre of the Morlocks. A quick history who the Morlocks are. They are a group of mutants that include mainly those whose powers are more physical and unable to hide, resulting in them living in the sewers away from humans. They were first introduced on Uncanny X-Men issue 169 from 1983. The most notable members including Callisto, their leader, and members Leech and Caliban, all of whom have appeared in multiple animated projects and even some live-action ones. At this point in these 3 years, there have been a few storylines with the Morlocks, both antagonistic and as allies, with Storm even being named the leader at one point. Now, issue 210 starts the arc where they would meet their end with the Marauders, a group of sadistic mutants going into the sewer starting a murder spree. This arc would also cross over with both Daredevil and Thor. It was also where Angel lost his wings, which led into the whole Archangel shit, which is a storyline I really like. It's also a story that Gambit will be tied to for a very, very long time, and not in the best light. That being the fact that he actually led the Marauders down to the sewers to kill the Morlocks. He did not know that they were going to kill the Morlocks, but he showed them where they were. The Mutant Massacre would even be adapted in the very underrated live-action series The Gifted, although with the Purifiers in place of the Marauders. During the first issue of the arc we meet Tommy, a mutant girl from the Morlocks, with a very striking design, with a pastel-colored woman appearance, with the power to convert her body flat and bendy. We're introduced to her and another mutant named Richard, opening the story right on Richard being murdered in front of her by the Marauders. We're given a brief description of Richard, to humanize him since this is also his first appearance, being murdered. Richard Salmons, age 27, a strong man with prospects, that died with him. Richard on near death essentially pleads for Tommy to help him, but she just runs, scared for her life. We watch as Tommy runs around train trails, with the thought bubbles confirming that she's nowhere near her fellow Morlocks, having branched off on her own, wanting to experience the world and adventure, no longer just trapped in the sewers, scared of discrimination. Well, now she has to be scared of murder. We see as one of the Marauders puts Richard out of his misery, with Tommy hearing the gunshot noise. We watch as Tommy hides crying, going on about how the Morlocks have been butchered, that Richard saved their life and she let him die in return, with this story actually showing the day after the massacre before we even see the massacre, setting up how horrible it will be. Tommy doesn't return until the end of the issue, along with details of who Richard was to her, an agent of the Hellfire Club who actually saved Tommy from the killings. But the Marauders didn't like that, hunting her down, and Richard. Tommy's still running around, and when she thinks she finally escaped, a harpoon hits her in the back as we watch her collapse, dying in front of the Marauders. This story is very important to show what comes next, showing a tease of the pain. It does a good job developing Tommy and how terrified she is, but also remorseful of her actions. She doesn't come off the most likable, being a coward to leave multiple people behind to die, but we do get a very good sense of her as a person before she herself dies. It's pretty interesting to see this done with a character whose fate is just simply set up before she's even killed, since her only purpose is to die. Her design and power set is definitely the best part of the character in my opinion. She also has a lot of fan art online, so I'm guessing I'm not the only one who likes it. Her death would also be a big stain on her killer's soul, Greycrow, who at the time was a villain, but would eventually grow to regret the man he became and try to rehabilitate. In 2010's Uncanny X-Men issue 529, Danger of the X-Men would have the danger set up for Greycrow to face his past, since he's unable to move on, with Tommy being one of the primarily highlighted kills he had, with a new design that makes her look a little more creepy. I'm not too sure if that was intentional, since why would it be? Danger is trying to help him, not scar him even more. Despite her first appearance and death being all the way back in 1986, she'd be one of the many, many mutants resurrected in the Krakoa era. But unlike most, she was brought back more subtle, this being in Hellions issue 1 from 2020. Subtle as in we don't actually see it, she's just back. Maybe she was brought back a different way, but likely was brought back the same way that other people were brought back. Instead, Grey Crow is confronted by a group of Morlocks. Tommy is just here, and with this era having a very strong focus on the resurrection of mutants by the Five, led by Hope Summers, it can only be assumed that's also how Tommy returned. Her design here is much better than her 2010 appearance, although I will say is not as good as her 80s appearance. It's a little less pastel and has a darker color palette. It's still, in my personal opinion, a very good design, but a bit different, to where I feel like it's not as good as the original, in my opinion. Here starts a bit of an inconsistency with her living status. In issue 10 of the same series from 2021, Grey Crow is seeing hauntings of his kills again, which includes Tommy, where he seems to imply she's dead again. This is the same writer. Did he forget that he brought her back? Looking at you, Zeb Wells. The most we've seen of the character since her debut would be Inferno issue 1 from 2021, where Tommy is alive, again, now having joined X-Force, where she's shown to work closely with Sage, and works behind the scenes, which seems to be where she has stayed, but we don't see much of it. In fact, we see nothing of it afterwards. So I guess it's assumed that the character still worked behind the scenes of X-Force. However, following Fall of X and From the Ashes, a new X-Force was created, and she's definitely not a member. So it's a bit unclear where Tommy is now, if anywhere. Maybe she's dead again. We don't know because she disappeared. The character of Tommy, despite her lack of appearances, is surprisingly drawn in fans, likely due to her very visually striking design, resulting in, like I said, a lot of fan art of the character being able to be found online. Tommy's Morlock membership would be adapted in the 92 X-Men animated series, with the character actually appearing in more episodes of the series than issues in the comics, appearing among the Morlocks in most of their appearances, mainly as a cameo to fill in the ranks, but it's definitely nice to see her in animation. She would return in X-Men 97, the continuation series, where along with the rest of the Morlocks, she would be murdered on Genosha, which has some Mutant Massacre undertones, but the main inspiration is Ease for Extinction and Zero Tolerance, all put into one murder event. The character in this new animation I think definitely pops, but she doesn't do anything. And that's the story of Tommy, the Pastel woman. Overall, I think the character isn't really much, but her design is likely why she keeps coming back, and why some people really like the character just based on her appearance. I mean, to be honest, it's a big reason why I even made this video, because I thought the character just looked so cool. Since she's still alive currently in comics, and there's so much X-Men content happening, I think it would be cool to see her again. But at the same time, I'm not begging to see more of her. I just think it could be a nice addition. She doesn't have to come back. I do think the character's best quality is, of course, her design, which I think is kind of lost a little bit as the character returns again and again. However, the character also not really having much of a defining personality outside of being a bit of a coward. You could really do whatever you want with Tommy. You could build a personality with the character. It could actually be a pretty interesting task for a writer. But yet again, at the same time, do you have to? I think the character overall, her design is a bit wasted on Tommy. Her design, I think, is a bit wasted, since I think the character should be more interesting if this character looks so interesting. But at the same time, she's not interesting. She's not. So I could see the character just simply being ignored for the rest of time, for the rest of the X-Men's ongoing continuity. What are your thoughts? Because I'm a bit conflicted. Like, I think the character could be more, but she doesn't have to be more. Do you think the character should come back, or do you think she's just, Or do you think the character is honestly just a waste of space? What are your thoughts? Leave them down below. Like always, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!